Thank you, Lord.
Hallelujah. Now for something more mundane. In that song, Our God is an Awesome God, there's a line which says, judgment and wrath he poured out on Sodom, mercy and grace he gave us at the cross. If you look at the Bible and divide it into the Old and New Testaments, it almost looks like there's two gods. The Old Testament is pretty well sort of concerned with the judgment, the wrath, the jealousy, the punishments of God. The New Testament is more concerned with mercy and grace and love. But it says that God never changes. He's the same yesterday, today, and tomorrow. See, the point is that God hasn't changed. The wrath, the judgments, the punishments are still there. Except for those who have accepted the mercy and the grace which Christ has brought.
Amen. Yes.
Amen.
So if you have a Bible, follow along with me if you can for a little bit. Go to John, the Gospel of John, according to John, chapter 1. First verse. In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. Verse 14, and the Word was made flesh and dwelt among us, and we beheld his glory, the glory as of the only begotten of the Father, full of grace and truth. Verse 16, and of his fullness we have all received, and grace for grace. For the law was given by Moses, but grace and truth came by Jesus Christ. We concentrate an awful lot on the grace and the love and the mercy, which is important. But sometimes we neglect that the other aspect of God is in the Old Testament. So, go back to Ruth. Ruth is that little book between Judges and Samuel. And we often know this story, and we often look at it as the story of Naomi and Ruth, going back, Ruth to marry Boaz, etc. But sometimes we neglect the incidentals because they are important. Chapter 1 of Ruth says this. Now it came to pass in the days when the judges ruled that there was a famine in the land. And a certain man of Bethlehem, Judah, went to sojourn in the country of Moab, he and his wife and his 2 sons. And the name of the man was Elimelech, and the name of the wife Naomi, and the name of the 2 sons Mahon and Charon, Ephrodites of Bethlehem. And they came into the country of Moab and continued there. And Elimelech, Naomi's husband, died, and she was left with her 2 sons. And they took them wives of the women of Moab. The name of the one was Oprah, and the name of the other Ruth, and they dwelled there about 10 years. Now, this is a very simple start to what's called a love story. But there's a lot to it, because it says, in the time when the judges ruled. The judges ruled after Joshua died. And there was a lot of judges, some of whom were good, some of whom were not very good. And when they were good, Israel seemed to prosper. But when they were not good, Israel did not prosper. And the reason for this goes back to Deuteronomy chapter 11. First two verses. Therefore thou shalt love the Lord thy God and keep his charge and his statutes and his judgments and his commandments always. And know you this day, for I speak not with your children who have not known, which have not seen the chastisement of the Lord, his greatness, his mighty hand, and his stretched out arm. Verse 7. But your eyes have seen all the great acts of the Lord, which he did. Over to verse 13. And it shall come to pass, if you hearken diligently unto thy commandments, which I command you this day, to love the Lord your God, and to serve him with all your heart and with all your soul, that I will give you the rain of your land in its due season, the first rain and the latter rain, that you may gather in your corn and your wine and your oil. And I will send grass in your fields for your cattle, that you may eat and be full. Take heed to yourselves that your heart be not deceived, and you turn aside and serve other gods and worship them. And then the Lord's wrath be kindled against you, and he shut up the heaven, that there be no more rain, that the land does not yield her fruit, and you perish quickly off the land which the Lord gives you. This is a warning, a blessing, and a warning. Now, this was the commandment and the context in which the judges came to reign. However, the judges didn't always do what they were told. Look at Judges 10, chapter 10. Verses 6, 7, 13, and 14. And the children of Israel did evil again in the sight of the Lord, and served Balaam and Asheroth, and the gods of Syria, and the gods of Zidon, and the gods of Moab, and the gods of the children of Ammon, and the gods of the Philistine, and forsook the Lord, and served not him. And the anger of the Lord was hot against Israel, and he sold them into the hands of the Philistines, into the hands of the children of Ammon. You see, the judges did not follow God's commandments. Verse 13 states, Ye have forsaken me, and served other gods, wherefore I will deliver you no more. Go and cry unto the gods which you have chosen. Let them deliver you. Okay? Judges 17, verse chapter 17. Verse 6. In those days, there was no king in Israel, but every man did that which was right in his own eyes. Look at the last chapter in Judges. The last verse. And in those days there was no king in Israel. Every man did which was right in his own eyes. Bethlehem was called the house of bread, but there was a famine. In Deuteronomy, God said, if you don't keep my commandments, I will cut off your rain, so your land will not produce. The land was not producing. So this family had to go to Moab. He and his wife and 2 children. Now, it doesn't say many other people went to Moab, but he did. Why was he the only one to have to go to Moab? And Moab in those days was where Jordan is today, and it was about 50 to 60 miles distance from Bethlehem, which, because of the mountainous territory, would be a 6 or 7 day walk. But 60 miles is not a big difference. There was plenty of bread and rain in Moab, just 60 miles away. So these people went to Moab. Now Moab was a country that was pagan, was not a friend of Israel, and a place whom God had said for the Israelites to stay away from. In fact, if you go back into the book of Numbers and read about Balak, when the Israelites were coming through the land, Balak induced Balaam to curse the Israelites, something which he could not do. However, he did deceive them into having an affair with the women of Moab. And this was where God devised or said not to mingle with the Moabites. However, Elimelech and his wife and the 2 sons went to Moab. It's interesting that he died there. The 2 sons, however, married Moabite women. Now, Moab was a country who took its name from the son, the illegitimate son, from an incestuous relationship between Lot and his daughter. Lot's daughters were the ones that Lot wanted to give to the men of Sodom. He said, just take the daughters. Do what you want with them. But they didn't, because these men were homosexuals. They didn't want women. They wanted other men. But when Lot and his daughters fled Sodom for Zoar and then into the mountains, the daughters got the father drunk and had incestual relationships with him. The first daughter had a son whose name was Moab. And it's from that son's line that the Moabites developed. So right from the start, the whole line was based upon illegitimacy. They did not worship the God of Israel. They worshipped another God who actually demanded human sacrifice. And this was the land into which these people fled, and the land into which these people married. So what happened? Both sons died. Male and 2 sons within the span of 10 years. Probably not something which would be considered unusual, but under the context of what was being done here, it probably was a symbol of what God was doing to this family. Now, in the long run, things turned out well for Naomi and for Ruth, who gave up her own country, her own God, for the God of Israel. But the point is that there was a famine there which should not have been, and that 3 men died who probably should not have. All because of the curse that was put on by God back in the book of Deuteronomy. They were warned again, especially in the book of Nehemiah, not to marry pagan women. But they did. Now the point is, God said in the commandment, I will have no other gods before me. And he meant that. The problem is that we don't have worship to other gods of wood and idol, but we worship other gods all the time. The gods of money, gods of work, gods of music, gods of pleasure. We worship them all the time because we put them before God. And as a result, they become the God we worship. God is not changing. Just because there's mercy and grace available to those who put him first does not mean the wrath, the judgment, and the anger is not there for those who don't. It is said that in the book, in the communion, that if you take the cup unworthily, that many are ill and some sleep because of that. The question is, how many of us are ill and die because of a judgment against us, because we put other gods ahead of the God we should? It's hard to be definitive, but the warnings are there, and the God has not changed. The God of the Old Testament is still the same as in the New Testament to those who don't have the grace and mercy that comes from accepting Christ. So, it's something that everyone should think about.